It's round 4 of the FIDE Candidates, and I have an incredible game to show you. It's the game between tournament leader Jan Nepomniachtchi. He's in the shared lead together with Fabiano Caruana and Gukesh. And in round 4, Nepo is playing with the white pieces against Vidit, who started very well with 1.5 out of 2, but lost painfully yesterday with the white pieces. And then, you know that the next day you're playing with the black pieces against another top player. It's not going to be easy. If you like the video coverage of this event so far, make sure to subscribe to the channel, as I will cover all the highlights for the upcoming rounds as well. Nepo starts the game here with the move 1e4. e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. And here we have the Berlin defense. In earlier games this tournament we have seen the move d3, which was played also by Nepo himself in that very spectacular game he managed to win against Alireza Firouzja. But now, small surprise as he goes for castling kingside. Not a bad move. Of course, it's one of the main continuations, but probably not something Vidit had expected for this game. Now, after knight takes e4, we do get the famous Berlin endgame, which was popularized back in 2000 in that famous World Championship match between Vladimir Kramnik and Garry Kasparov. Queen takes d8, king takes d8, knight c3, bishop d7, h3, h6. This is a position which has been seen in hundreds of games. And now, the most common way of playing here for white is to play something like b3, followed by bishop b2 and connect the rooks. But so far nobody has managed to really crack this system. Now, for this occasion, Nepo comes up with a completely new plan. This is going to be very exciting. He plays the move g4. This has been played in earlier games. You're attacking the knight, and the knight can only come back to e7. And here, the real novelty, it is the move knight h2. This may look absolutely bizarre if you see this for the first time, but it does make sense, because one of the main advantages for white playing this queenless middle game is to try to utilize your kingside majority. Therefore, you move the knight away, you're ready to push the pawn to f4. And this is something which is what Vidit could not have prepared for this game. Maybe he has seen this idea earlier, but it has never been played before. So very good, practical, new idea by Nepo. So what should black do? Difficult to say. There are ideas like pushing the pawn to c5 and then get a knight to c6 to keep an eye on this pawn on e5. It's very interesting. But here, Vidit played the move g5. Radical move, but often a typical plan in the Berlin opening, as you would like to get your knight to g6, play the move bishop g7, and try to wrap up the pawn on e5. Here, white goes for the move f4, so that after g takes f4, bishop takes f4, the bishop comes into the game, it defends the pawn on e5. And well, there's also some long-term pressure against that pawn on f7. So therefore, black play the move bishop to e6. The bishop is well placed on this square. It's a nice blockading square, defending the pawn. Also, you're keeping an eye, preventing white from marching forward with these pawns. Nepo continues here with knight e4. So the knight is ready to come to nice squares like, for instance, f6 or maybe even c5 to attack the bishop on e6 and the pawn on b7. So here, the move b6 was played. It's also a typical plan. First of all, you cover the c5 square. The knight is not able to go there. And an additional plan is to bring the king to the queen side. Knight f3. The knight comes back. The knight is, of course, badly placed on h2. So it was not the plan to keep the knight for much longer there. And white is ready to get the rook into the game. And, well, there's also another very important plan here. Black played the move c5. And white goes for knight f6. One point is that bishop g7 is never really an issue, as the knight will come to h5 to attack the bishop, and then the bishop will have to go back again. So therefore, that is not a problem. Black played instead king c8. White goes king g2, king b7, and now king to g3. Typical plan, as the king is of course going to play a very important role later on, especially when more pieces are coming off the board. You see that the king is trying to support the advance of the kingside majority. So I like this position quite a lot for white, even though objectively speaking it's still okay for black. I can feel the pressure black is facing here. So what should black do? Who knows, maybe something like knight e5 to get a bishop to e7 later. Also the move played by Vidit. It's very understandable as he is looking for counterplay on the other side. So he played the move a5 with the idea to go a4, maybe to play a3. Also the pawn on a2 is a target always, so it's not easy for white to move the rook away from a1. And therefore white decides to place the pawn on a3 first. Maybe there's also something to say for a move like a4, trying to fix that queenside majority of black, typical plan in these Berlin middle games. But instead a3 is played. Black goes for the move a4. White played the move rook 81, controlling the only open file, and still you can see that black is having a hard time trying to find the best places for its pieces. But finally the knight comes to c6. So if you ever move the knight, maybe the knight can come into to d4. So white played here c3, controlling the d4 square. Bishop goes to e7. Sometimes you may consider training off the bishop for the knight, but not sure that's an improvement at all. Black has the bishop pair, and these bishops for now, they are preventing white from coming any further. So the main point here is to get the rooks into the game. Knight h4 is played, and maybe at some point the knight would like to come into to f5. Black never really wants to take, because you take back with a pawn and you get a 2 versus 1 on the ENF file. So black comes up with a very important move. Played here the move h5 to put pressure against the pawn on g4. Now knight f5 is a bad move. This was not played, but the point is that everything can get swapped. And this is a very important typical transformation when you end up on the f-file with doubled pawns. So now white's potential threat of creating a new passer, it's over, it's gone. And black can just take over with a number of checks. You force the king to go to inferior square, and then later on you will pick up these 2 pawns. So anyway, that was just an example. Knight f5 is not a good move. But g5 is played here, which is a much better move, but it does enable black to get some grip on the light square. So what should black do? Various ideas. For instance, plans like b5, b4, that can be considered. Also a move like bishop d8. It's not strange at all. You may think, what is this bishop doing there? But you could seriously consider moving your knight over to the king side via e7 to g6, and then this bishop is neutralizing white's e-pawn. But here Vidit gets a little bit ambitious, and I'm not sure that's what he should have done here. He played rook a5. So the idea is to go rook b5, rook d e1, overprotecting the pawn on e5. There was nothing white could do on the e-file. Rook to b5, attacking the pawn on b2. And now the bishop goes back to c1 to defend the pawn on b2. Here, another critical moment in the game. Black has this option to play the move c4 to open up the 5th rank so that the rook challenges the pawn on e5. I guess that black didn't go for this move because of the move g6. But here things are getting extremely tactical, but you can take on e5. And you don't have to fear the advance of the pawn to g7. When you're about to promote your g-pawn, but after bishop takes f6, black is alright. If you take the rook, bishop takes h8, black has 2 pawns for the exchange, and the knight comes into d3. Black is having a wonderful life. You should then, in that case, take back with the rook on f6, but here it's rook to g8. And the g-pawn is not going to queen anytime soon. Probably bishop h6 will be played to defend the pawn, but how is white able to break through? Black has also a lot of counterplay with something like knight e3, hitting the rook and the pawn on b2. So this is something which would have to be analyzed even deeper. But according to the machine, this is still playable. I like this idea with c4 to activate a rook. Vidit had a different idea in mind. He played for the move rook to b3. Now g6 is played, threatening g7. And to promote the pawn, as the knight is a very annoying piece. F takes g6 played. Now the knight comes into g6. Look at these knights attacking the rook, taking away a lot of squares from that rook. Maybe black can insert a move like h4 to force the king to go back to an inferior square. But rook d8 was played first. And now White is getting rid of this bishop pair. Knight takes e7, knight takes e7, knight takes h5. This is a big pawn, but still, white's pawns are not going to queen very soon. That's what you would think. However, these are 2 pawns, and what can black do in the meantime? There's not much he can do, it seems. Rook d3, check. If the king goes away, pawn on h3 will be taken. Rook f3, blocking the check. Rook takes rook. King takes rook. Bishop takes h3. Now white still has a nice e-pawn. Look at this. e6 is played. The blockade is gone. And white is supporting that passed pawn with its rook. Black is looking for counterplay with the move b5. But there's bishop to g5 attacking the main defender of black. The knight should go away, but where it should go, it's very hard to say in a practical game when you're under pressure, being confronted from the very start with this huge novelty. Where should the knight go? Maybe the knight should go to g6. I'm not sure what is the exact difference, but in the game there followed the move knight to d5. e7 is played anyway, and now bishop to d7. Look at this. White has the chance here to promote its e-pawn, but after bishop takes, there's rook takes b2, and you see that the knight is fantastically placed on d5. It hits the pawn on c3, and white, despite being a piece up for 2 pawns though, probably black is absolutely alright and will save the game, as very soon the remaining pawns will be exchanged. But here the big difference, instead of promoting your e-pawn, it's rook to d1, attacking the knight on d5. This is a big moment in the game. Once again, maybe you should set up a counterattack with bishop e8 to attack this bishop. If you do take on d5, it's bishop takes h5, and still black is holding on. However, idea of bishop e8 is to force the knight to go to a somewhat inferior square with knight g7. Then you can go bishop to c6, and well, there are all sorts of discovered attacks available here. Black has still drawing chances. If you move the king, knight takes e7, you're ready to give up that piece. Rook takes b2, and well, there's also a rook g2 as a threat to win the knight. You're about to eliminate these 2 remaining pawns. The knight on g7 is far away from where the action is taking place, but Vidit, instead of bishop e8, went here for the move king to c6, and now king to e4. That is a big move, as you're just hitting that knight on d5, and the knight doesn't have good squares to go to. Knight f6 is on the agenda to attack the bishop as well and support the promotion of that pawn. Counterattacking with rook takes b2 will just be met by rook takes d5 and rook e2 check. King d3 attacking the rook. White is winning. Relatively the best option for black is to give up that knight for the pawn and then take on b2. But compared to that line where that knight was on g7, white has much better winning chances here. Not with the move rook d8, because it runs into rook e2 and the bishop is hanging. So no time for white to win the pawn on c5. But you start with knight f4 to guard the e2 square, and then rook d5 is a serious idea. Maybe knight g6, knight e5 also comes into consideration soon. Who knows? White is pressing a lot. But there followed the move bishop e8, attacking the knight on h5. Rook takes d5. Bishop takes h5, and now you may think, okay, if you're trying to promote a pawn with rook d8 and e8 queen, black is going to take on b2. You don't want the rook to get back into the game. Therefore, this move, bishop c1, and look at this, the rook on b3 is just stranded, can't go anywhere. Even this idea to deflect the king from supporting the rook with bishop f3, king takes d5, there's e8 queen, and white is winning the game. So black instead went for the move bishop g6, giving check, retaining control of the promotion square. White's only move is king e5 to defend the rook. Black tries here the move b4. He wants to get rid of these pawns so that the rook can come into play, but then it's king f6. Brilliant idea. If you take the rook, king takes g6, and there's no way the rook is able to stop the pawn. Also, the king is too late, of course. So bishop goes back to e8, but now it's rook d8, and this bishop is in trouble. There followed the move b takes a3. You may take the bishop, which is probably winning already, but I like the move chosen also by Nepo. He just recaptures the pawn, not allowing any sort of counterplay. And well, if you play something like bishop h5, there will probably follows something like rook h8, and the bishop is unable to stay on this diagonal. Not enough squares to move the bishop. If you take on c3, there is rook takes e8. If you take the bishop on c1, then the rook can just go away. On the next move, you're promoting the pawn, and you will win the rook. And well, the ensuing race, it's not a problem at all. The white king, is absolutely too close to pose any problems for white. So bishop d7 was played. This is the final trick, the final critical moment in the game. Because it's very tempting to eliminate this bishop with your rook. But after rook takes d7, king takes d7, king f7, you're intending to promote your pawn. Well, black is just back in time now because the b file is open. You're in time to control the queening square. So what should white do? Simply reverse the move order, starting here with a move king to f7. There's no time to get the rook back to the back rank or get the rook somewhere behind to give checks, to stop the pawn. This is the moment where Vidit resigned. After rook takes c3, it is rook takes d7. And of course, if you take with the king, then you're promoting your queen, promoting your pawn with check. And it's even going to be checkmate on the next move. Well, you don't have to take the rook, of course, but if you do give a check, for instance, on f3, then there is king e6 to defend the rook on d7. There's no more check as the bishop covers the e3 square. So this is a very important and spectacular win. Nepo completely outcalculating his opponent in a very sharp queenless middle game of the Berlin opening. This is something we have not seen in a while at the highest level, and that means that Nepo is moving to 3 out of 4, and he will be in the sole lead. Even though other games are still in progress, it's very likely he will be in the sole lead. So let's see. We're going into the first rest day. Monday is a rest day, but on Tuesday more exciting games to come. So stay tuned, and please make me one favor. Hit the subscribe button. Thanks for doing that, and I'll see you soon again. Bye bye.